everyone who would have also come here. So we really appreciate that you've taken the time to come here and learn about filmmaking in post-Soviet republics. And it's actually a very exciting panel, so hope you will enjoy it. My name is Elham Shakarifar, and I'm one of the founders and directors of a film collective called Postcode Films. And we run film education workshops in schools, colleges, universities, and we're just beginning to work internationally, firstly in Georgia in September. So that's kind of the relevance of why we're here on this panel. I'm also a documentary film producer. And so very excited about this panel where we'll be learning from 3 different actors in, I guess, the film industries in their countries. The panel is supported by the British Council, and all of our panelists are creative, part of the Creative Leadership Initiative by the British Council. So the format of the session is going to be, we'll have a 15-minute presentation from each panelist, and we'll have a short Q&A afterwards. So first up, we've got Kino from Georgia, who's an award-winning filmmaker and producer. She founded Artifact Productions in what year? A couple of years ago. Yeah. Based in Tbilisi. She's worked as a reporter. She's a trainer for Georgia's Matra program for media, and she's here also with a new film that's almost finished. Yeah. Very exciting. With her co-director as well. So she's going to give us a little insight into the history of Georgian cinema.
Well, yes. Can we have the presentation? So I'll try to give brief overview of what the documentary is. Georgia it looks like the history of the past century and what is going on now. Very briefly, what I'm doing now. I'm a filmmaker, and currently I'm working on a film called English Teacher. And currently in Georgia, we have there is a desperate desire to get rid of Soviet legacy, and therefore there is a project in Georgia when thousands of English teachers are coming to Georgia, to the remote villages, to teach English everybody, in substitute to Russian. So this is what the film is about. Our hero is one of them. So these are some of the films that we, as an Artifact production, small production in Georgia, are producing. And now a little journey through the history of documentary film in Georgia. It goes back to the beginning of 20th century. And the first documentary film in Georgia was produced in 1912, which we have up to these days. And it's quite unique of its kind. It's a feature-length documentary, which is about Georgian poet traveling in the western Georgia. And here is an extract. It's quite interesting and quite poetic film, which in the whole cinema history, it's quite unique from this period of time. Then in 1921, as you all know, there is a Soviet invasion in Georgia, and it, of course, it affects documentary filmmaking as well. I will just stop on one film from 1930, which is called Salt from Svaneti by Mikhail Kalatozishvili, who is also known as Mikhail Kalatozov, which is known as one of the most interesting films in the world documentary film history. And it's interesting because it's a mixture, quite a synthesis of documentary and fiction. Because of its poetics and editing and composition, it's very interesting film. So next stage of documentary film in Soviet Georgia is the period of Stalinism, which is repression and propaganda. And although there were filmmakers that were trying to find some interesting forms and use the film language in new forms, basically, in documentary films, it was propaganda reels. Although it's a bit late example, but it gives the soul how documentary film was understood in Soviet Georgia. And many interesting filmmakers during this period of time were banned, and we saw their films only very late. The next stage is in film history is known as, and it is 1960 after death of Stalin, as the golden age of golden years of Georgian cinema. Mostly in fiction, because it was about the filmmakers developed quite an allegoric storytelling, a so-called Aesopian language, to deal with the reality and develop an irony. And it was films, quite tragicomical films depicting the Soviet reality of Georgia. And some of the well-known directors from this period of time are Otario Seliani, brothers Shengelaya, Sergei Parajanov, who was also working at that period of time in Georgia, etc. So this is just one example from the documentary of Otario Seliani, who is currently living in France. He emigrated in 80s to France. But this is one example of his documentary, his early film, which he filmed in 1962, if I'm not mistaken. It looks almost like Soviet film, but it's quite different from Soviet propaganda reels. And you already feel in this early example the poetics of the language and the irony, and the montage is different than it was in Soviet propaganda reels. And that was the start of Seliani's career that he developed later in Georgia and then in France. The next period I want to stop for a while is the collapse of Soviet Union and how it was reflected in documentary filmmaking. Of course, with the collapse of Soviet Union, there was a rise of this nationalistic movement and nationalistic feeling and religious content in documentary films. But since there was a demonstration that was, and people were killed by Russian army during the demonstration. There was a civil war later in Georgia, and then there was war with Abkhazia, the breakaway republic. There was no time for documentary filmmakers to reflect, so it was really more like direct representation what was happening at that moment, and there was no possibility to distance yourself from these terrible events. Because of cheap video production, filmmakers were able to capture all these things of video, but we don't really have from this period of time very good officially commissioned documentaries, because it really was war stage. This is one of the this is the center of Tbilisi, one of the examples of footage that was later part of bigger documentary films. But that's the House of Parliament, for instance, and this is what was happening in Georgia in 1992, 1993. So I already mentioned this religious, after 70 years of Soviet rule, there was really rise of religious feelings that were reflected in documentary film as well. And also there was, later there was, in 1990s, there was a shift of perception who were traitors, known as traitors in Soviet period. They suddenly became heroes. For instance, there was a case in 1983, if I'm not mistaken, when a group of young people hijacked an airplane from Tbilisi, from Soviet Georgia, and they wanted to fly to the West, but they were jailed. People died during this operation. They were jailed and they were executed. And in 1990s, there was an interesting documentary film called Bandits, and so they were perceived as heroes in independent Georgia, while they were perceived as traitors in Soviet Georgia. And 1993, 2003, again, it's quite a direct representation of what is happening in the country. We don't really develop the artistic documentaries in this period because it's an economic crisis. There are no funds for serious documentary films, and broadcasters pay very little for documentary filmmakers. But this is one of the most interesting films, I would say, from this period of time, which is, again, the mix of documentary and fiction film. And this is interesting because what director does, he takes a character, a fictional character, and sends him to war, to Abkhazia in 1993. And there is a real war, and a fictional character, an actor, is in the war, and the situations are quite real, and what is happening there is quite real. So this is an example of Graveyard of Dreams, and it is actually almost the only film that depicts the situation, what was happening during the war times in Georgia. Although it's fictional, the footage, what you have, it's fiction, the footage is like documentary, so it's quite interesting. Okay.
Давай, Вася. Eu აბარეს. Აჩო, ყველამ თაძო. დამასკოში უნდამ თუ შენი იმედი მო. შენ მაგის გამიგეთ მიგა.
So one character is a fictional character and others are just normal situation, what is happening. None of them here. None of them here. So, and I would say that from 2003, there is kind of, maybe because of time, but filmmakers are somehow starting to distance themselves from what was happening in Georgia, from these turbulent times, although it's not quite settled in Georgia yet, but there is kind of more reflection on what has happened and what is happening, and we have quite many interesting directors, and it's kind of new wave in documentary filmmaking, and one of them is a film by Salome Jashi, I would say, Speechless. This is one of the examples how this direct representation of the crisis changed into quite of reflection on crisis, because during the war in 2008 with Russia, she made a film, documentary film, when she filmed speechless faces of refugees. Just no interviews, just faces, and it was quite an interesting film, and it said a lot about the new trend of documentary and the situation in Georgia itself. So I would mention few main themes that are dominant in the documentaries produced in this period of time. So, of course, it's an identity crisis. It's in turbulent times. Georgia was kind of looking who we are now and where we are now. 70 years from Soviet Union, and now this globalized, quite a new, we want to engage with the West, and it is all reflected in documentaries. Migration and clash of traditional and contemporary, or otherwise we can say clash of different civilizations, which is also part of the film I'm producing now, English Teacher, when a Westerner comes to the remote village of Georgia and tries to change the situation, but people doesn't want to change. That's the idea. So this is the film from Nino Giftadze, produced in this period of time, about this is Pipeline Next Door.
როიყო საფრთხე კილომეტრი კიდე
ქალბატონო აი
აგერ არის სახლების გვერდები
დაუშვათ მოხდა რაღაც
ხილავი რაღაცის მოლოდინი მაქვს კიდე და კიდე რომ მეც ვერ სასწრა
აი ისეთი განგესტერებს როგორც ბილადენია მაგალითად ხო იმას რას გაუძლია
ეს კოლებს ამოიღება აქ ჩააგეთ ნახევარწრის მიწა არ გავე რაღაც რო გადათხარო ზემო როგორ გადავიდე გადაჭრილი იყო მაგრამ
ორმიასეთში ხო სინამდვილეში გადავიდნენ 400-ში უილად საუბარი ხო რამდენიმე კაცია
So that was about the pipeline by British Petroleum, which goes from through Georgia, from Azerbaijan to Turkey. And about latest trends, we have now kind of these dual narratives, conflicting narratives. Films financed by broadcasters mostly are about change, revival, glittering facades, successful reforms, victory, democracy, how democratic we are, but films by independent producers and films mostly financed by funds from outside are about frozen conflicts, refugee crisis, survival, despair, defeat. So just to illustrate my example, I'll show you the clip from one of the films financed by broadcasters, how Tbilisi is rebuilding. And there is a rebuild indeed, and there is a renovation, but there are other great problems as well. So this is just an example of television documentary which got funds. And the next documentary is from Salome Jashi, which was financed by Georgian National Film Center, but mostly her funds were from European Media Program, MDR, Arte, and it was very popular. I mean, it was accepted by many festivals and got very many prizes, and it's about stagnation, about constant anticipation of change when it never actually comes.
Samitsali uteir atara sevşin. Origo badidi, real sevşin ordidi. Samitsali didi atare orisali ağe begiz. Şena orisali didi samitsali badar. Sultan çede meremi çede. Evet bir rumul çamede ne çamede.
So that's it. Thank you very much.
So I think we'll go to questions afterwards, and we'll go straight now to Daria Avrachenko, who's also a documentary filmmaker, and she also runs the PR for DocuDays, which is the only documentary film festival in Ukraine. It's an international human rights film festival. She studied journalism and television art, and she's also worked as an editor for different channels, including one in Germany. So Daria's going to take us now through similar kind of history of Ukrainian cinema and the current day.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I think we have a lot in common with Georgia because we're here post-Soviet countries. But I hope that you'll hear some new information about Ukraine. Actually, the documentary process started in the end of 19th century when Josip Timchenko in 1893 invented the first movie camera and started his chronicle shootings about horse riders and spear throwers in Odessa. And he showed it in Odessa Café France. Just 2 years before Brothers Lumiere started their film screenings. And in 1896, Alfred Fedetsky, another chronicler, started his first film screenings in Kharkiv's Opera Theatre. Actually, Alfred Fedetsky was very successful because he was official chronicler, the first official chronicler and photographer of Romanov's royal family. And Brother Lumiere's asked him to sell his films, but to erase his name from the title, so he refused. and opened his own cinema in Zhytomyr, and his business was very successful until the cinema burned down and all film rolls were lost in the fire. Films of Stalin era. I must say that all films, the most films of this period served for social propaganda, but we had some very interesting experimental movies. I think that everybody knows Dziga Vertov. In 1930 and in 1931 he worked in Ukraine, and his avant-garde experimental movies, The Man with the Movie Camera, Kino, he shot in Ukraine, financed by Ukrainian government. So we can say that it's Ukrainian films, not Russian, as it mentioned in the catalog of Sheffield Film Festival, I must say. I think that you can, and this is Donbass Symphony. I think one of the most beautiful films by Dziga Vertov. He shot it in Donetsk region, in the coal miners, and it's how romantic hard work. During the Sheffield Film Festival, you can see a retrospective of Dziga Vertov. During the Second World War, documentary was significant development, and I must say that Alexander Dovzhenko was one of the most remarkable figures in that period. In 1943, he made the battle for Soviet Ukraine and victory in Ukraine. And for the first time, viewers heard not the dry voice of an announcer, but the actor's voice who retranslated personal feelings and thoughts of Alexander Dovzhenko. So it's like it was his personal war, we can say so.
Первым ворвался на окраину города командир гвардейского полка 93-й дивизии майор Григорий Рудик.
The next period, movies of soul period. So after Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev became the head of Communist Party. And he denied the cult of Stalin as personality, and the censorship wasn't so high, the pressure, I mean, of censorship, and it was fantastic time for Ukrainian poetic movies. And this period made their movies Yuri Ilyenko, Sergei Parajanov. We shared with Georgia and Armenia because Sergei Parajanov was also he was Armenian from origin, but was born in Georgia and worked in Ukraine. So it's like, yeah. So the poetic movies, what was really the original thing that in this period filmmakers could work with national material and on the Ukrainian topics. But the blooming age of Ukrainian documentaries, 70s and 80s years of 20th century, in Kyiv was built huge science film studio, and it's how science documentary become popular in Ukraine. We had science magazines, film magazines before the movies in cinemas, and people loved them because it had no connections with Soviet propaganda, but was very interesting. We have really masterpieces by Felix Sobolev, 7 Steps Behind Horizon, and Animal Language. It's how to explain really difficult science topics with easy language and in humoristic way. These years were really complicated, and BioUSSR, it's one of the central films of that period. It's, by Alexander Ornyansky, how we built our independent country. The next films about historical events, we see posters of films about Orange Revolution, The Seventh Day by Oles Sanin, and Nevseremus by Sergei Masloboyщикov. Actually, they filmed events of the year 2004 in Kyiv. After Orange Revolution, our, I think, documentary film star, Sergei Bukovsky, started to analyze history of Ukraine, and here are some of the main of his historical films. The War, Ukrainian account about the Second World War, Spell Your Name, which produced by Steven Spielberg, about Holocaust, and Alive, about genocide of Ukrainians by Stalin, and also the last film about Ukraine is Ukraine from 90s till 20 years of independence. And new generation of Ukrainians. I think that we have very gifted Ukrainian documentaries, a little bit poor and complicated documentary process now, but here the posters of the films Wayfarers by Igor Strimbitsky, who actually took the prize at Cannes Film Festival. Against the Sun by Valentin Vasinovich, who took the prize in Clermont-Ferrand, a film about this difficult relationship between artist and his wife. And also film Radunica, who got Go East Film Festival prize by Roman Bondarchuk, a film about borders, Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus, and where are we now? I think that we have interesting international projects. One of them, one of the fresh projects, 15 Yan Bayan. It's an almanac about 15 post-Soviet countries. Where are we now? And Ukraine segment was presented by Roman Bondarchuk with his film Polina. Also, we have a really interesting project, Polish-Ukrainian project, Euro 2012, 2012 offside, about Euro Championship, which is taking place these days in Poland and Ukraine, and it will be delivered in autumn. We observe really high interest of foreigners to Ukraine today. Very bright films here. The English Surgeon by Jeffrey Smith about friendship between English and Ukrainian surgeons. The Other Chelsea by German Jakob Preuss. And it's the story from Donetsk about our Donetsk oligarchs. and the pit number 8 by Estonian film director Mariana Kaad. So this is posters from the main film festivals in Ukraine. Molodist, it's like really the central film festival, more than 40 years old. DocuDays UA, I work for DocuDays UA as a member of the selection committee, as PR director, and Open Night, national film festival. So some reasons to come to Ukraine to submit your film. Also, I prepared extras just to add my presentation. Push the button.
How do we add the film extras? Doing the extracts from all the films that you've been mentioning.
Yeah, how foreigners see Ukraine and how Ukrainians see Ukraine, something from fresh documentary process in Ukraine and about Ukraine. Yes.
У вас в Европе правоохранительные органы защищают и власть, и оппозицию. А у нас правоохранительные органы защищают только ту политическую силу, которая находится у власти. Кто проиграет на президентских выборах, тот сядет в тюрьму.
Дамы и господа, мы приглашаем к микрофону лидера партии регионов Виктора Януковича!
Дорогие друзья, вы знаете, что победителей уважают во всем мире. Шахтеру, Украине, ура!
Девушки пригожие тихой песней встретили, и в забой отправился парень молодой.
Что, издеваюсь?
The room in our flat. We have got a living room. It is comfortable.
Что ты делаешь? Ну что это? Последняя шмотка твоя. Ну что ж ты делаешь? Там скажут, кто ее учит. Там же будут музыканты. Вот в соло. Точку последнюю, которую ты ставишь. Ну при чем здесь это?
Налетели вдруг ангелы смерти, кричат: добивайте, бейте. Тут же добрые ангелы: тише, суки, он еще дышит. В общем, пока под охраной, нам разлагаться рано. Детка, сестра пришла с мужем, пока не могу выехать. Дура.
Ты же любила меня тогда, помнишь? Меня чуть крышу не снесло. Так а представь, как может человек чувствовать 17 лет. Он больше так уже и не может чувствовать.
Thanks, Daria. I think it's one of the things we were discussing earlier is quite interesting. We'll come back to is also the impact and effect of actually screening some of these films in film festivals. Quite interesting the dual role that you have as both a filmmaker and someone who works as a selection committee of the film festival and the impact that has. So we'll go next to the last country that's represented on this panel, who's represented by Mariam Ohanian, who's also a filmmaker, producer, scriptwriter, and she's also the director of the Kino International Film Festival, which is Women's Film Festival.
Hello. So, thank you that you come. And film as a reflection of the epoch. The first film in Armenia dates back to 1907, when the newsreel of the funeral of the Catholic Makurtich Hrimian was made. During the years of World War I, Armenian Chronicles short episode of battles in the Caucasus Front, the tragic events of the genocide of the Armenian population by the Turkish authorities and the evacuation of Armenians from Western Armenia, Turkey to Eastern Armenia. After the establishment of the Soviet power in Armenia in 1923 by a decree of the Council of People Commissars of Armenia, the private movie theaters and cinema institutions were nationalized and the film studio Armenfilm was founded. The first great project of Soviet Armenian cinematography was the documentary Soviet Armenia, Country Nairi, director Beknazarov and others. During World War, the teams of Armen Film Studio used to shoot episodes of battles at different fronts. In 1941, director Balsanyan released a feature film for the front about feats of labor of the corps miner in Armenia and a documentary Sons of Armenia about feats of arms of Armenian soldiers. The documentaries of Soviet Armenia were mainly news documentary and was of propaganda nature, and there could also be found films about famous culture figures among them. In the 1970s, there came another generation of directors like Ruben Gevorkian, Aravauni, Rosa Frangulian, and many others, and the circle of interest increased. But a real breakthrough in Armenian documentary became the poetic and philosophical film by Artavast Pelesyan, who created his own film language and became the founder of remote editing. The idea of remote editing is that the plot of the film is given not in the junction of film stills, but their interaction through numerous links. This gives a stronger and deeper expression of the plot than the direct patching. Pelician was born in 1938 in Gyumri, graduated from GIG, and he is also of numerous films. His films have been awarded many times at different prestigious international film festivals. Now you see a piece from the film Season of Year, 1975. Since the collapse of USA in 1991, the Armenian cinema has experienced great expectations and disappointment. The hopes and excitement were initially inspired by some bright debuts receiving freedom and independence from government and censorship and stream of private capital into film production. The new Armenian cinema seemed to be engaged in a search for identity on all levels, national, historical, and individual. But the excitement of the early 1990s soon came to an end. This so-called time of transition with economic crisis turned into chronic disease of Armenia. In 1994-1995, the cinema production was totally paralyzed. The state system of film distribution had collapsed too. Almost all the cinemas were shut down in Armenia. At the same time, the majority of the newly emerging film studios went bankrupt. About 20 were registered in Armenia by that time. In 1996, the government resumed provisional subsidies for film production, and the money from Ministry of Culture went to two state studios, High Film, also called Armenian Film, and Hike Studio. It's a studio of documentary films. During the years of economic crisis, blockade, and war for Karabakh, many films dealers left their jobs because of lack of money. During the time, the Chronicles of War and Weekdays of Blockade Yerevan were being shot by effort by a Hike Studio and enthusiasts from independent studios. And here I would like to dwell upon certain films which in my opinion reflect best of all the atmosphere and tendency of the last 20 years. One of them is 4-minute film by Ashot Makarchan. Now you see that film. Cameraman and director. Film is called Non-Stop. It was shot in 1998. It ironically and sarcastically narrates a dramatic story of Armenia in the 90s, where a whole nation turned out to be engaged in bloody war under the leadership of demagogues, and there is no end to it. Another film by Ashot Makarchan, Winter Melody, narrates about a musician who earns by playing the cello in winter streets of Yerevan. His music becomes a background for the weekdays of blockade Yerevan, when people stand for hours waiting for transport, go holding on to trams and trolleybuses, and when the light turns down, they go ahead by themselves, and everyone is in the search of firewood without acceptation, such a sad and funny film. Could you voice to more higher voice? There were a lot of films about war and war heroes, and among them, The Break That Lasts Forever by Vresh Petrosyan is especially distinguished, which tells about school children of senior classes of a secondary school in Nagorno-Karabakh who couldn't graduate because of war. Growing up, all of a sudden, they stepped from childhood into war, many of whom never came back from there. A sad and spirited movie. The film Tale About Pegasus by Armen Khachaturian tells about the fate of an artist and sculptor, Nelson Shirvanyan, who was begging in crisis and devastation, and a beloved actress, Sophie Sargsyan, in her times having personified the character of heroine of Henrik Malyan's film Nahapet, a woman having survived the genocide of 1915, which today she herself has to survive like her heroine. In order to somehow obtain food for the family, she has to make and sell sandwiches in the central market. Unfortunately, this happened to many representatives of intelligentsia of those times. Among the documentaries of those years is the film by Haratun Khachaturian, The Documentarist. The film is a documentary drama which was shot for 10 years and consists of several chapters such as Stone Quarry, John Maternity Hospital, and others. The main character, documentary film director, and his small crew shoot and look through different stories. The film is composed of various materials that give a testimony of Armenia in mid-90s. The film ends with birth of a child who doesn't cry, and the audience wonders if it will survive. In some sense, this question refers to the whole Armenia, which is terms of war, blockade, and crisis struggles for life, with all efforts will it survive and will it remain standing. Another one film is a successful true film of young generation, Arman Yeretyan, Under the Open Sky. It tells about homeless people, and this topic is very popular in Armenia, and this film was very successful and received many awards in festivals. Another one is film directed by Edgar Bagdasaryan, Country of Sacred Rituals, and another one film is From Arad to Zion. The films are dedicated to the problem of restoration of the place and significance of Armenia in the context of worldwide culture, which have been wasted for years of silence. Here you see a trailer of the film From Arad to Zion. The director Edgar Bagdasaryan belongs to the generation of directors who have come to the cinematography from other professions. Vartan Hovhannisyan is also among such directors who left for the front as a military operator, did not graduate from the university, and today appears to be the director of one of the most successful Armenian independent studios called Bars Media. He is author of the film A Story of People in War and Peace. The film, using archival materials, tells about today's life of the people who were at war in Karabakh. It was the very studio where the film The Last Tightrope Dance in Armenia was shot by directors Inna Saikian and Arman Yeretyan. Both films were very successful at festivals. There is no picture.
No picture.
Okay, now I finished. So today we have some festivals in Yerevan. One of the biggest is Golden Apricot. And there we have DAB, Direct and Across Borders program, training for directors where they can do pitches and can receive some money. We have another festivals too, International Women's Film Festival, Kino, YESM, it's films of young children film festival, ecological film festival. So, and of course, we have some problems with documentary, but because it's sometimes difficult to broadcast on television, but the one place where you can see films, it's festivals. And at the end, I would to say that, of course, documentary film is very important because what can be compared with the old chronicle? Nothing if only it is preserved. So now you see the film from a piece of the film Gerard Miniatures. It tells about ordinary life of a village, such a modern poetic film. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So that film was directed by you, actually?
Yes.
2007. Okay, great. So it's probably a kind of switch from very different countries. Maybe I'll start by asking a few questions, then we'll kind of open it for any questions that you have. Since the title of this panel was Kino Futures, and we were looking at kind of post-Soviets, I was wondering whether you could each talk about the relationship with Russia nowadays and what you kind of in each of your contexts and how it kind of, what the influences are and what the relationships are.
Well, I think our case is different because
different.
we had a war with Russia in 2008, and still like 20% of Georgian territory is occupied by Russians. So it's kind of quite difficult, complicated relationship in cultural sphere as well. So. There are some projects developed with Russia, but quite the relationship is very tense at the moment. And although there were two festivals, Russian film festivals in Tbilisi, in the capital of Georgia, last year and the year before that, there people were quite opposing showing Russian films in Tbilisi. Because it's still very fresh, and that's why, like, market for Georgian films, and we're more looking for cooperation with Europe rather than with Russia.
Yeah. What about the situation in Ukraine is very different?
We are in the war situation with Russia, but it's information war, I think, because we are occupied with Russian language and Russian culture, and so it's in propagandistic politics because Putin doesn't want to let us, and that's why, as the culture representatives, cultural leaders, we try to organize dialogue, conversation. In the way we know and we can. For example, during the today's UA Film Festival, we invite a lot of Russian filmmakers and trying to organize some project where Russian can live and shoot in Ukraine, and sometimes when we can go there and shoot in Russia their topics. Our Poet on the Run is the project that we shoot together with Roman Bondarchuk, who is also in this hall. So the project about the poet who wanted to become famous in his country, in Ukraine, but it was Soviet tradition that if you want to become famous in Ukraine, you should go to Russia, to Moscow, and there you come back like a star. So the situation remains, and film is about the way of their Ukrainian artists. It's how the things are going.
And I suppose the situation is very different in Armenia.
It's not very different. We have no problem with Russians, but it doesn't mean that we have such many co-production projects and many such things, because after such independence, all system was changed, and all system of filmmaking, of film producing, it's changed. And so now, of course, we try to work in a new way. So, and it's very different from Soviet times, and I think Russians, they try to work in new way too. So, but we are open and we try, but we have not so much co-production.
So there's not very much Russian investment in Armenian films, even though...
Sorry?
There's not very much Russian investment in Armenian films?
No, there is no investment in culture. There is no investment in culture from Russia.
Okay. And another question I had, I guess, was about collaboration between post-Soviet republics. So we had the example of the 15 by 15 films. And are there more things like that developing, or is that something that, you try to develop, or it's possible to develop, but they're very different?
I think, of course, it's possible to develop such a co-production, such a connections, and of course we are all interested. But after such a collapse of Soviet Union, all republics, they went to different ways and lost connections. And of course, it's a problem because we need to be together, because we have a common history, and we saw today that all Soviet period was the common and similar. And of course, sometimes we understand each other better. And it's not bad to have connections, not only with Europe, but with other republics too. And we lost that connections. And now I think we will try, I hope, to rebuild that connections.
Daria, do you want to talk a bit about the 15 by 15, because you're involved in that project as well, right?
Yes, it was a fantastic project, absolutely new experience for us, because Ilona Bichevska, who was our Latvian producer, she found young, interesting, very gifted documentary filmmakers in post-Soviet countries. She made a great job. And Ukraine, we represented Ukraine. And so all films, it's about new times in our countries, what we are doing 20 years after Soviet Union collapsed. And I think that in the competition program, one of the films, Alato, by Kyrgyzsian filmmaker Chingiz, I really suggest to find opportunity and to watch the whole almanac. It's very interesting. Actually, we made it together with Arte France. Also good experience for young post-Soviet film directors, because we still don't know about all opportunities in Europe. Ukraine is not an EU country, so we are not in Euromash, in media. It's almost impossible to find finding the ground level, and yeah. And that's why such projects is really opportunity to find new talents and to open yourself also for the world.
Yeah, to develop those partnerships. And I guess that's very much what Georgia is doing. They're newly part of Rimage, so it means there is level of European funding that you can access?
Yes, actually the current situation in Georgia is changing because Georgian National Film Center is very much looking forward how to integrate with Europe, and there are very many platforms currently that encourage co-productions and trainings, and some European schemes are developing in Georgia, and many films are funded by international funds. And also one of the films in this 15 Young by Young project was by Georgian film director Salome Yashi, which is called Swim, which depicts the refugee camp in Georgia, and it's a very interesting short film.
Wow. So maybe and funding is an interesting way, I guess, to think about censorship and what how you make films, how they're funded. Does that influence what they are and where they're shown? And can you talk each a little bit about different levels of censorship, how it affects filmmaking in each of your countries?
As I mentioned earlier, broadcasters, national broadcasters, they are not funding artistic documentaries at all. There are some regulations about cooperations with the Georgia National Film Center, but actually does not work, and there are I can't remember any good documentary film which is funded by a broadcaster. So they fund only, if they fund at all, only kind of propaganda, very journalism-oriented film, but it's nothing to do with investigative journalism, because media environment is quite controlled, broadcasting media, especially in Georgia. That's why we look for funds outside Georgia. So this is a tool for censorship, but Georgia National Film Center is still government-funded body, so it's very good. Even in government organizations, you can find very bright people who are quite flexible to deal with authorities.
So, for instance, your film about the English teacher was...
Yes, this film partly is financed by Georgia National Film Center, which is state money. So, but it's about quite vulnerable subject for government, but it is funded.
And it doesn't. And you feel as a filmmaker, it doesn't.
No, I'm very glad that we managed to get...
Well, because I know you, and I know that you're very kind of outspoken about what you think, and you
I'm very glad that that it's possible to make documentaries even in the controlled media environment.
Okay, similar.
I think that we need to have really good film process, active, intensive film process to observe some tendency, and we don't have it now in Ukraine, unfortunately. That's why we tried to organize some workshops during the DocFest UA Film Festival for young filmmakers. Just not let them go to TV and commercial production studios, so it's impossible because we'll lose the next generation of very gifted young filmmakers. But I understand Europeans, it's the most simple way to find a European film director, to give him money and to shoot in Ukraine, for example, and then to receive the results, then to look for their talents in Ukraine. But I think that the situation will change because nobody knows how we live except us. So I think that it's better for me to shoot in Ukraine than to shoot in Britain. I don't understand the whole process, how you live. So it's a normal thing that British or German people, they don't understand Ukraine completely.
So you feel that, for instance, you talk a little bit about the other Chelsea. We had quite an interesting conversation earlier about how it opened DocuDays. Was it this year?
Yes, it was the previous year. Actually, Jakob Preuss opened DocuDays Film Festival with the other Chelsea story from Donetsk. So he made really great job. He went with Ukrainian film crew to Donetsk and filmed Ukrainian, Donetsk Ukrainian oligarchs and also people who work in coal mines. And it was a film about contrasts of today's life in Ukraine. And he became famous after our film festival. He took many awards. I'm really proud that we do this work together. But of course, it's like German see Ukraine. With this animation, you can see this attitude, very humoristic. For us, it's tragic things, actually, that's how we live now. But for German, no.
Do you think it would have been possible for a Ukrainian filmmaker to make a film about that subject, or?
I think that it's possible, but it could be maybe a little bit problematic, because if you're a foreigner, so nobody touch you. But if you're Ukrainian, you should be a really brave person to take such topic.
So there might be repercussions. And in Armenia, the situation?
In Armenia, we have only one state documentary studio, Haik studio. It's shoot nearly 8 films. And of course, it's not enough to our country. And we have independent studios who are looking for co-production. And as I said, one of the most successful independent studios is Bars Media, which is working very successful with different international funds and find co-production. So, but of course we have a problem with professionals and we need more maybe professional producers who are working in a new way, and we have a problem with distribution, and we have a very small market, and it's all the questions we need to solve. So, but it's a process, and thanks to video, it's possible to shoot film by your own, and many people, they shoot, they begin to shoot, they film by their enthusiasm, and to hope that it will be successful at the end. So, and Golden Apricot Film Festival, which is very big, and it's organized many workshops, trainings for young directors, and it's support to development of that field too. So I hope we will have any result.
I think actually the Golden Apricot had a partnership with Sheffield last year, didn't they? And
last year they were a partnership
with Sheffield, and Hussein from Sheffield went to Golden Apricot for training and different things. Anyhow, though, I don't know whether you have any questions in the audience to ask our panelists. Yeah? Is it switched on?
One theme, migration, and then you were talking about the young filmmakers, and I thought, is this, because I'm from Lithuania and I study here in UK, because we don't have like, I don't think, you know, very good kind of possibilities to learn from, you know, I mean, there are professionals obviously, but just to learn about the more global, you know, area of filmmaking. So is this a kind of a problem in your countries of migration, or do you don't think that's a problem? Is that a good thing?
Definitely in Georgia, because after in 90s, many people were emigrating from the country, and very many women are going to the West to work as a babysitters or work in the family. So, and they sent their salaries, part of their salaries, to the children and to their husbands, who are left alone in Georgia. Very many women from villages. So there is a very good documentary film called Women from Georgia, and this documentary film is about women living in United States. And there are several other documentary films that are developing right now, projects about this topic. And definitely before the Rhodes Revolution in 2003, definitely it was the case. But even now, I would say that many young people prefer to live in the West rather than in Georgia.
Specifically?
Georgia is a very interesting country for a filmmaker to live in. I mean, it's kind of minefield to film, but not for production and for distribution. Mainly, some of them, they live in the West, but they film in Georgia. So this is how it works better rather than live in Georgia and you work in Georgia.
I would like to say that yes, we have big migration in the filmmaking, such a. We have many filmmakers in Russia, in Moscow. They have big companies, and some of them are very successful. But it's not Armenian cinema. They are working in Russia. They produce direct Russian cinema, and it's a big difference. So, to be a national director, you must live in your country. But of course, Armenians, you can find Armenians everywhere. We have very big such a community in all over the world after that historical things. And during Golden Apricot, many Armenian directors come from different countries and show their films. But of course, when a director lives in another country, he becomes a part of that culture. So Armenian by origin, who is living in the UK, he has become Englishman as a culture. So at that time, we cannot speak maybe about Armenian national cinema. We can speak about Armenian origin of that filmmaker. And yes, of course, we have big migration because it's very difficult to be successful in Armenia, to work, to produce. There are more possibilities in other countries as Russia, United States, and maybe Europe. And of course, many young people, they want to go to other countries and to work there.
Do you want to add anything?
I don't know what to add, actually.
Okay,
Yes, the situation is the same.
Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when you said the thing about the Chelsea film in Ukraine, if Ukrainian had made it, what do you think? Why would you say that it wouldn't be a good idea to make it, or they'd have to be brave to make it? What would happen to them if they had done? Do you think? I mean, is it really that you really can't make a sort of honest film about what's going on?
There were some Ukrainians in the crew, so Jakub shot this film with Ukrainian sound director, and he told us that it was quite stressful for him because Donetsk guys, people from criminal circles, during these shootings asked him what this German is doing here. What the fuck is going on? So he was so scared that he couldn't go to the stage during the opening of the DocFest UA Film Festival previous year. And it was something that really surprised us. But Jakub, he has its untouching неприкосновенность. Untouching. As a member of you, as German, how nobody could touch him.
He's untouchable. Because
untouchable, yes. So he was like untouchable. And I don't know what we can expect from Donetsk guys. No, I don't know.
And you also had a very bad example of outspoken journalist Gongadze, who was killed like in previous government time, but it was really bad signal for like whole post-Soviet space, what could happen to the journalist if government does not really like him.
It's really sad page in our history, yes, but it was the years of Kuchma. So he was the president, and it was another criminals on the stage, criminals from Dnipropetrovsk. So another circles of criminals. But Gongadze case moved us to Orange Revolution, I must say. And now he's national hero.
Any other questions?
You were saying it's a minefield of possibilities for filmmakers out there. What do you guys want to make next? Do you have any ideas for?
Sorry.
You said it's a real minefield of possibilities for films to be made in your respective countries. Well, you particularly in Georgia. Are there any films that you think you really would love to see made in the next year or two?
You mean films that I'd love to see made in Georgia?
Yeah. Any subjects that you think?
Well, yes, there are very many subjects. Now we are having, it's an election time in Georgia. So after the Rose Revolution, it's the first time Georgian people should decide whether we like where we are or we want something else. So it's quite a tension in Georgia right now. And I don't mean that there are many subjects, not only political subjects, but this tension influences all other areas as well. So I don't know, it can be anything, it can be education, the field that I'm working in with my film English teacher, because this process of change and this need for change influences all other areas as well, and the Soviet legacy that we cannot really get rid of. It is somehow reflected in all areas, at all levels.
I'd love Ukrainian filmmakers more focused on the topics, not on the politicians, but on common people, because we have a lot of really interesting stories about successful stories, how people from province struggle for their rights. We have a lot of difficult and strange things and terrible things when the criminals can get to a house and tell you that now it's our house, for example, get to a private business, to your store, and tell you, so this is our business now. And there are a lot of such stories today in Ukraine. And for me, it's interesting to develop how people protest themselves, because every struggle is very important today. And the struggle begins in province, I think. So for me, this topic is much interesting.
Marianne, do you have anything to add?
I think it's difficult to say. Maybe I think a documentary, in one way, is a reflection of our life, and in another way, maybe we need some successful stories, because in documentary we see many problematic stories, many social issues, and sometimes we need to see the light at the end of tunnel, and maybe by film to help people to find that way to the light. So I think maybe people need such kind of films.
Often documentaries are quite depressing. That's been the theme of this festival, no? That we need to find some more uplifting documentaries. Hopefully we'll be able to make some. Are there any last questions? Because we'll wrap up otherwise. But, well, join me in thanking the panel for this very interesting kind of background in history of the cinema in each of your countries and the future, hopefully brighter. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.